Peace and love, family. Yeah. So we live tonight. We about to go ahead and take a look at a video tonight. So we're gonna do some uh, hidden Moorish history revealed. Let's see. I'm just making sure I'm live everywhere. All right, so we're gonna get ready to play this video. Basically, what we're gonna see is how accurate this video is. Look, some people, you know, claim to be the be all expert of a thing. I'm not here to do that. I know what I know. I can share what I know. But we're going to look at this. I am a researcher. I have been involved in this particular topic personally in my personal life now for, let me do the math. It's 2026. So I got 28 years in the game. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look. I think we're live on Instagram. Can't really tell. I'm going to go, let me open up this chat real quick, y'all. Is that the people chat? All right. So if y'all got any questions, just put them in the chat and we will address them. It looks like we're live on Instagram. Looks that way. Yeah, I think so. So we're going to go ahead and play this. And so today, as you can see up in the corner here, I have a disclaimer. Basically, this is all fair use. So, I'm going to be doing this quite a bit, actually. Hopefully, I could do these at least once a day to bring you guys up to speed. And basically, what we're going to do with these is really just draw a line in the sand. From a official in the Moorish movement, I will be giving my honest critique on any of the videos I react to. And we'll just be talking about Moorish history, Moorish science. We might talk about health. We may talk about law, civics, just whatever, whatever's out there concerning Moorish Americans and the Moorish movement. We're going to take some time and really look into it and share. I'm going to share what I know, and prayerfully it helps somebody out there. So we're going to play this now. Let's get this going.
One of the things that's interesting, particularly with the information that's been coming out recently, is the fact that there are historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists that are saying that the interpretations of the ancient world cannot really be defined because there's a lack of continuity as it relates to the peoples and the places, the events and the things that have taken place. And the reason why that is, and it's quite simply because these different scholars do not want to get into the reality that, as Dr. John Henrik Clarke often taught us, the missing pages of world history is African history. And so it becomes important that if you want a true interpretation of the culture, of the people and the places, there is no way that you can leave Africa out. But because of the sociological conditions of always attempting to make it seem as if African peoples are inferior, primitive, that they have not contributed anything to civilization, because they lack that ability or desire to, we never get the proper cultural interpretations. And so the work that we're doing is meant to look at the world before the European began to write their history books. And to truly understand the Moors, you have to go before the people that we call the Moors.
Okay, so now we're getting into it. All right. Now, what I want to do, I just want to make sure that I'm all the way tapped in over here. So, obviously, we're going to be talking about the complete history of the Moors. This is according to Kaba Kamema. Kamimi. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He does have another name as well that he goes by, Professor. And forgive me for forgetting his name. I think in the past, I've looked at some of his videos. He shared some pretty interesting information. Um, I don't always 100% agree um, with what the brother has brought forward. However, a lot of it I do. So I'm just going to let it rock. I'm hoping this is playing. This is what I wanted to check. Let me make sure we are getting this sound on here good. Because I would not want to be doing this. And you guys can't even hear what's happening. So hold on 1 second. Now, if anybody in the room can check, that would help. Let us know what's happening. But what I'm going to do, let's get this to play here. Let me see one more time.
We're dealing with episodic history and we're dealing with holistic history. The episodic history takes episodes, such as the West African kingdoms that people give credit to: the Ghana Empire, the Malinki Empire, the Songhai Empire. When you look at Egypt, they go from the first dynasty and on. And when you're dealing with the Moors, they tend to look at 710 when it was reconnoitered by Tarif, one of the lieutenants of the African general Tariq, that went in to reconnoiter the southern part of Europe, specifically Spain. And then 711, July of 711 to be exact, Tariq and his African warriors and some Arab translators crossed over into Spain and began their conquest of this area. This was a preemptive strike.
All right, so let's briefly address what we've already covered. You know, he's made some good points, but what I want to highlight is that all of the people that he mentions, every last one of them are all considered under the umbrella as Moors, the Moorish paradigm. He named modern names of those people. And in those days, And this is something that I can definitely prove. I don't want to do it right now. I have to pull out all the data, but and this is what I mean. I like the fact that he brings uh, more light to Moorish history. He definitely provides insight and historical references for the data that he's presenting. However, there's much deeper, richer uh, information out here. But I think the brother does a good job, definitely, when it comes to like beginner information. Get your get you started.
Having assured himself of the necessary command of the sea, Musa sent the Berber Tariq, one of his freedmen, to possess himself of Tangiers and the strong places of the neighbouring districts with a view to crossing over into Spain. Tariq accordingly marched thither and took the strong places and cities of those Berbers. This being done, Tariq wrote to his master, "Musa, I have found here 6 vessels." Musa told him to take them and to sail for Spain. Tariq did so in the year 710 and was joined by Musa himself in the year 711. The conquest took place at the beginning.
Now, there's a key here. Notice the AI voice said Berber. Berber is a synonym for Moor. You will get all kinds of perceptions, interpretations, but I will definitely go deeper into that because there's a lot of people, even from the continent, um, that have a lot of mixed understanding. Because the understanding is that Berber is some sort of a uh, negative connotation. It's a way to call people barbarians. However, the barbarians, that is a reference to the Germanic tribes. The Berbers, although later they tried to connect these two terminologies, that term is a indigenous term to Africa in many different mm, in many different manifestations. Uh, Again, I don't want to go too deep into that, but uh, Berry Berry, Berebra, uh, Berber, Berberi. There's all of these different references. Not only, and I'm not speaking of the spice. I'm actually speaking of names of people on the continent that have identified themselves. And these are people that we call today Amazi in ancient times. And that's the language that they speak, the Afro-Asiatic tongue. And if you want more information on that, I would say look into Dana Marnici. She goes pretty deep into all of that stuff. And I've done presentations. If you go onto this page and you look around, you'll see stuff on the YouTube page. But I'm going to let it continue. I just wanted to
Beginning of the 8th century and was for all ordinary purposes complete. It was carried out almost entirely by Berber troops, whom Musa continued to convert, to organize, and to draft into Spain. Tangiers, which had always been a Berber stronghold, became for this purpose his military headquarters, and he was enabled perpetually to recruit his conquering armies with fresh troops. Tariq took 12,000 of these converts with him on his first landing. There was a tradition lingering from the Greek occupation of the country that Spain would be conquered only by 2 nations composed of peoples unaccustomed to the luxuries of life, hardened by privation and fatigue. The Arabs and the Andalusians alike translated the prophecy to apply to the Arabs and the Berbers. Shortly after the whole of Spain was reduced, there was a general Arab migration to it. and it was with this Arab migration that the high civilization came. For about 50 years, the Berbers in fitful revolution struggled against the Arabs for the sole possession of a country which they claimed that they and they alone had won. The conflict between the dynasties of the Umayyad and the Abbasid in the east gave opportunities for the disaffected in Spain. But about the middle of the 8th century, when the Abbasids succeeded in overthrowing the dynasty of the Umayyad in the east and possessing themselves of the caliphate, one son of the Umayyad escaped into North Africa and, after many adventures, established himself under the name of Abd al-Rahman, the first upon the throne of his fathers in Spain. He ascended the throne in 757, thus separating the Caliphate of the East from the Caliphate of the West, and brilliantly opened the chapter of cultivated Arab rule in the West. During the first 2 centuries of the
So again, I guess this part's a little confusing because I was expecting Dr. Kaba to do this presentation, and now we have Miss AI giving us her uh, presentation. So I'm gonna let it continue, but I was hoping for Dr. Kaba to do the presentation. We'll see. Maybe he'll pop back up.
the rule of the Umayyad, the Arab dominion in Spain reached its highest point. The court of Abd al-Rahman and his successors became the center of all the art, the learning, the refinement, and the elegance of the known world. Commerce brought to the shores of Spain the best productions of every land. Science was honored. Arab travelers penetrated to the furthest limits of the Eastern Hemisphere. All that India and China had to teach was known to them. Medieval Arabian achievements in the higher paths of learning are well known. There is no branch of scientific development among the Western nations upon which the Arabs have not set their mark, either by original research or by the service which they rendered in transmitting to their European posterity the learning accumulated by other generations in other lands. They initiated the Renaissance in Europe by preserving and translating at a much earlier period the great works of the Greeks.
So again, I just have to highlight this and I guess tease this out a little bit. You can see that the title of the video was A Complete History of the Moors. And I'm seeing the code switch happening. And this is the same code switch that happened that I addressed when I was in high school. And I asked the teacher because I had been aware of and studying Moorish history since I was about 13 or 12 or 13 or so. And what I noticed was when they began to address the Moors, they immediately code switched and used the Arabs. Now, no doubt there were Arabs there, and no doubt that the dark Arabs can and have been identified as Moors. However, they're making a distinction here because they've already referenced Moors. And Berbers that are synonymous. Although Arabs, according to Europeans at that time, could be synonymous, this presentation is making a distinction between Arabs and Moors when we're talking about Moors in Andalusia in Spain. However, it's now saying the Arabs were responsible for all of the greatness in Spain. Let's see how they continue this.
Hoarded knowledge of the East. In addition research, or by the service which they rendered in transmitting to their European posterity the learning accumulated by other generations in other lands. They initiated the Renaissance in Europe by preserving and translating at a much earlier period the great works of the Greeks. They gave a vivifying impulse to all the intellectual life of the West by introducing to it the hoarded knowledge of the East. In addition to the geometrician,
Gotta say something about that, because there they go again. Uh, and not saying that the Moors did not preserve the knowledge of the Greeks, but they were specifically known historically to be the custodians of the ancient Egyptians, which easily trumps the Greeks. So for them to point that out is just a little Eurocentric in their style of presentation and understanding of historical representations. And we're in regards to spreading learning, you know, West Africa was already the center of learning during that time. That's where all of the universities were located. And then the Moors set up universities in Andalusia. So I just found that was interesting. I wanted to point that out.
astronomers, geographers, mechanicians, botanists, chemists, physicians, who appear to have collected all that was known in Asia as well as Europe, and who wrote voluminously the works of many of them amounting to 50 and 60 volumes, every branch of literature was represented. There were histories, essays, poems. There were treatises upon arithmetic, grammar, poetry, rhetoric, canon and civil law, jurisprudence, logic. All the arts to which elaborate architecture and luxurious domestic life gave rise were, of course, highly developed. Painting appears to have been restricted chiefly to decorative work, but we are repeatedly told that the palaces of southern Spain were filled with works of art. It is interesting to note that in the great days of Mohammedan Spain, Arabian women were not confined, as in the East, to harems, but appeared freely in public and took their share in all the intellectual, literary, and even scientific movements of the day. Women held schools in some of the principal towns. There were women poets, historians, and philosophers, as well as women surgeons and doctors. America alone appears to have been unknown to the Arabs, and when we remember that modern Europe had to wait for the journey of Magellan around the world in the opening years of the 16th century to be quite sure of the shape of the globe, we must admit that in the learning of the Arabs of Spain, Negroland had sources of information far purer than any of which England at that time could boast.
Wow. Have to stop it there for a moment. Negro land is crazy. Like, that's crazy. To even make that as a reference in your presentation, not even sure who let that, like, who was the producer of this? Dr. Kaba, they must have just stole that clip of him talking about the Moors in the beginning and then came up with their own little piece here, because this is, pretty interesting. That last piece, let me back it up. It says something real interesting here. Uh, Give me one second.
Women held schools in some of the principal towns. There were women poets, historians, and philosophers, as well as women surgeons and doctors. America alone appears to have been unknown to the Arabs.
So again, code switching Arabs and Moors. This is a classic Eurocentric, Orientalist, racist, skewed historical representation. And so I'm seeing as this as this just moseys on, it's getting worse and worse. Uh, yeah, this is pretty bad actually. The fact that they said that that they were waiting on Magellan to figure out if the Earth was spherical or not, and that they had no knowledge of the Americas is absolutely ridiculous. Um, if you do the research, people, there's a Moorish golden globe that exists, I believe, from the 9th century with all of the continents on it. There's other maps that we could reference and talk about. However, that's an actual Moorish globe um, that we can reference that predates Magellan or anything like that. So I just wanted to touch on that. I'm going to keep on, pausing as we go because that's how we have to deal with this information. Again, like I said from the beginning, we're just drawing a line in the sand. If they're talking about something that we can verify, something that uh, is factual, truthful, I'm gonna say so. If they start to fumble, I'm gonna point it out.
And when we remember that modern Europe had to wait for the journey of Magellan round the world in the opening years of the 16th century to be quite sure of the shape of the globe, we must admit that in the learning of the Arabs of Spain, Negroland had sources of information far purer than any of which England at that time could boast.
Crazy, really. Make sure you guys like, subscribe.
The reason why Africans
Comment.
went in was because of a preemptive strike. And because of this, and because we lack an understanding, we have to go back to the Punic Wars, of which there were 3, that happened before the Common Era. Basically, give or take 300, maybe 200. This is the time of Hannibal Barca, who went to war with the Romans. Hannibal Barca, Barca. This is the Hannibal that we see that's going up into the Alps with elephants and defeating the Romans. There are things that we need to understand about the history of this area. Out of Tunis, this is where Carthage, or what we call Carthage, was.
It seems to result from the most careful investigation that the principal commerce of the interior of Africa has always been carried on in 2 directions. That which has been described from Ethiopia through the valley of the Nile, and that of the Sudan from the Niger to the Mediterranean coast. The western end of the road, starting from Carthage, ran in a southeasterly direction through the Fezzan to the site of the present Mosul. After making the junction at that point with the Egyptian road, it turned southwards to the Niger and was the road which has been so often mentioned as the Tripoli-Fezzan road of the present day. Along this road, the Carthaginians traded with the Niger for carbuncles, skins, gold, ivory, and other goods. Thus, we get on unquestionable authority evidence of a well-established connection in very early times between Ethiopia and Egypt by the valley of the Nile, between Egypt and Carthage by a road crossing the desert through Siwa and Augala, and between Carthage and the Niger by the present Tripoli-Fezzan route. If we take Mosul and Thebes as lying almost on the same parallels of latitude outside the Tropic of Cancer, and Gao and Meroe as having also almost parallel positions on the edge of the summer rains, some 8 degrees farther south, we get the 4 corners of an irregular parallelogram, of which 3 sides were in permanent communication with each other.
These were the cousins to the Phoenicians who were in present-day Lebanon, and these were the traders, and these were the merchants. Phoenicia basically comes from the word purple. And as Dr. Ivan van Sertima tells us, purple was the color of royalty. Purple was a color that was looked upon as a very important color. Purple was with the Greek Empire. Purple was with the Senate in the Roman Empire. Purple was a color that was traded for generations and generations because it had an important esoteric value. Purple is the last color as it relates to the rainbow. You go from infrared to ultraviolet. So these Phoenicians, these traders in the color purple, dealt with their cousins who also were traders from Cartadas. And this is why they were wealthy, Africans in Tunis.
The civilization of the Phoenicians, contemporary at least in part with the history of Egypt.
So let me just pause it for a moment. There was nothing really said there that I disagree with. That was pretty on point. And yeah, I'm gonna let it continue.
Dates also from the earliest periods of which civil history has any record. The Phoenicians are believed to have migrated from Eritrea on the coast of the Red Sea about the year 2000 BC to the Mediterranean.
So that's key. I won't go too far into that. But for those that know, if you really know, pretty much everything can be traced back to what we call Eritrea today. Language, all of the Afro-Asiatic languages, from Hebrew, Arabic, Amazigh, Giz, which is the most ancient language that we know of today. It is considered the father of all languages. And in fact, the mother of all languages, which is known as Sanskrit, uses the alphabet of Giz. So it's literally the mother and father of all languages. So it's pretty interesting. What's up? What's up in the chat? Peace, peace. I'm gonna let this thing continue. Yeah, we're just checking out these videos. We're just giving some commentary, giving some reactions.
Where they were first established on a strip of Syria between the chain of Lebanon and the sea, and afterwards took possession of a portion of Greece, of some of the islands of the Mediterranean, and of the principal promontories along the coast of Africa to the Straits of Gibraltar, and as far down the western coast as the mouths of the Senegal. They also colonized Spain and spread up the coast of Western Europe, navigating as far as the Baltic and the English Channel. Carthage, of later growth, is believed to have been founded about 853 BC. Other Phoenician cities on the coast of Africa were of far greater antiquity than Carthage, and Phoenician trade in the Gulf of Salé on the west coast of Morocco was famous for many centuries before the Romans gave to that part of the coast the name of Sinus Emporicus, or Merchant's Bay. Phoenicia, like Syria, was never one state, but from the earliest period down to the Persian monarchy was always divided into a number of separate cities, each with its little territory around it. Allied cities in Phoenicia were very numerous, and it is thought probable that there may have been periods when all the cities of Phoenicia formed one confederation, at the head of which at one time stood Sidon, and at a later period, Tyre. Throughout the colonies of Phoenicia, as well as in the mother country, a common religion formed likewise a bond of union for the cities and strengthened and preserved the connection between them. The chief authority was placed in the hands of kings, who in turn were to some extent controlled by high priests. The revenues of the cities depended in large measure on their trade, and the Phoenicians have lived in history as a commercial people. Through a considerable portion of their history, the Phoenicians appear to have acted as commercial agents for Egypt. As they sailed, it is related that they landed on the coasts, sowing the land and waiting for harvests. Thus, a tradition of them lingers on the west coast as well as on the east, and to them it is in some quarters believed that the legend of the first white men in western Negro land may be traced. Carthage had intercourse across the desert with Negro land, and drew thence its supply of elephants, as well as gold and carbuncles. We may perhaps therefore carry back the date to a period when the Phoenicians dominated Egyptian politics, and the worship of Astarte or Venus Erycina was common in the valley of the Nile. It is interesting also to observe in Egyptian records the constant reference to magicians of the south. The part which magic played in the chronicles of Egypt is of course a matter of common knowledge. The whole north coast of Africa was, we are told, protected by talismans, burning glasses, and other marvels raised on pedestals which were placed at intervals along the shore. Alexandria could not be built till talismans had been erected, which had power to protect it from the monsters of the deep.
So that to understand who the Moors were, you have to step back. You have to go beyond 710, 711 AD. Who were these people that went into Spain? And you would have to understand that the Moors, they were the Etruscans. The Etruscans were Africans that had built the city known as Etruria. Etruria is the country we today call Italy. The Etruscans were on the islands of Sardinia, on the island of Corsica. They were developing civilizations in the Mediterranean basin. There were Africans that were in Spain 1,000 years before the Common Era. We have to see that the language of the Etruscans comes directly out of the Niger-Congo language, which goes from West Africa through Central Africa to Southern Africa. It is the base upon which Kiswahili is based. It is the language upon which most Africans are now in dialogue to. The largest group of Niger-Congo speakers are the Bantu people. I don't care for the word Bantu, but the basic thing is that these are the well-melanated Africans.
Okay, I'm just gonna stop it for a second. He is cooking right now, so I gotta let him keep cooking. And peace to everybody in the chat.
That show evidence of the civilization of linguistical culture comes out of the Niger-Congo language, and this was the language spoken in the Mediterranean basin. When you go over to Turkey, this was an African place. When you go to Greece, it was African. When you go over into Italy, it was African. And guess what? The capital of the country.
Cooking, y'all. Like, this is information that, now is pretty common, but people still don't want this information to get out. So we're getting it out.
Country, Etruria, was called Rumé, R-U-M-A. We're talking linguistics now. That is why the capital of Italy today is called what? Rome. It came directly out of this. All of the Roman baths, all of the Roman civilizations, the architecture of Rome came from the Etruscans. These were the individuals that had settled in this area thousands of years ago when there were no other cultural groups in this area. There were no Greeks. There were no Romans. This is what most modern day cultural anthropologists don't want to talk about, because you'd have to give credit to the people who developed these civilizations. So that to understand who the Moors were, you then would have to understand the three distinct dynasties of the Moorish Empire from 711 to 1492. The first being the Umayyad Abbasid, the second being the Almoravid, and the third being Almohade. And what's important in terms of understanding these three dynasties and how long they reigned and what they brought to the civilization, you would have to understand not just North Africa, you have to understand West Africa. But to understand what would populate West Africa with civilizations that could bring forward great things, you'd also have to understand what happened in North Africa as it relates to a particular river and what exactly was going on in Africa at a certain time in history. Climatological experiences. Go back 5,000 years before the Common Era. You're dealing with what is called the AHP, the African Humid Phase. It is at this time that North Africa is lush. It has trees, it has forests, it has savanna grasslands that's growing fruits and vegetables. It has lively rivers. And it's also important to understand that although we see these rivers today in Africa as being unconnected, the West Africa, the Senegal River, the Niger River, okay? In Central Africa, you have the Congo River. In East Africa, you have the Hapi or the Nile River. When you go down south, you have the Limpopo and the Orange River. What's important to understand is that during this humid phase, this wet phase, all of these rivers were connected. And there was lively trade going.
So y'all, I don't know what the deal was with that AI voice that was doing a part of the presentation, why that was woven into this presentation, but I'm glad that she's not talking now. I'm sure she'll be back in a minute, but
On. There is evidence of trading merchant materials that came from West Africa. You got it in South Africa. There are things that are grown in South Africa that you see in East Africa. There are things in Central Africa that you see in North Africa. And so we also have to know that the beginnings of the human family, the Twa and Mbuti people from Central and Southern Africa, began as hunters and gatherers. But then they got on the rivers and they began to fish. This is where they got a lot of their vitamin D. This is where they got a lot of their supplement food. They became fisher people and they became water people and they traveled across the entire African continent. I know this may be difficult to understand, but when someone tells the perfect lie, the truth is unbelievable. And so that as an African people, Africa was a lively trading group of people.
That last thing he said is really on point. I don't know if y'all know, it's a brother in the community, not in our community specifically, but in the broader community. He goes by the name Ankh. And Ankh has a saying, and I might mess it up, but it's something to the effect of, an organized lie beats a disorganized truth every time. And it is so true. So just keep that in mind.
Have ivory, elephant ivory, in Italy. How did it get there? You have ivory in America. How did it get there? Ain't no elephants in America, at least not indigenous to America. And so what you have to ask yourself that these cultural anthropologists don't want to get into, because they know that they're going to have to go black. They're going to have to understand that this is what Africa contributed to the world. We're not talking superiority or inferiority. That's not the point. The point is, what is the truth that brought civilizations into where they are today, that the Western world is now the recipient of? How did it happen? Starting in the Atlas Mountains in Algeria, coming down and swerving through North Africa and bending over into West Africa to the country that we today call Southern Mauritania, there is evidence of a river. And this river is called the Taman Rasset River. Tamanrasett. I'm a teacher. I got the spell. Taman Rasset River. And this river was a lively trading place between all of these African peoples from West Africa to East Africa to Central Africa to Southern Africa, and all the tributaries and the lakes that branch off from that allowed these traders to go all over the place and travel. And it was during this time, the African humid phase, that the Taman Rasset River acted and brought up a civilization of people that were traders throughout the African continent. However, there was a phenomenon in the northern part of the earth known as the Worm Ice Age. This Worm Ice Age, while bringing frozen times to the northern climate that caught Africans up there, at the same time, it brought heavy rains into North Africa. These heavy rains, as time went on through the African humid phase, began to change into what's called the AAP, which is the African arid phase. And in this dryness, with the heavy rains that had fallen, it ate up all of the richness of the soil. And what was once lush green started the Sahara Desert. The evidence of it is that you can literally see the sands of East Africa off the coast of West Africa in a place called Cap Timiris, Captimiris. You can see these same sands that's in the Sahara in Kemet. You can also see them on the West African, just outside of the coast of what we call southern Mauritania. Now, when this dryness occurred, the trade that the Africans had been going through was so rich they didn't want to give it up. So what they did is they started to dig underground tunnels where they could continue their travels and their trades from one place to another. But what was interesting is that there came a time after being underground for a long period of time, sometimes without fresh water and fresh food, what they started to do was to dig a tunnel that would come back up on the ground. And what would they create? They would create what we call oases. And these oases is where they would freshen up their animals, freshen up themselves for food, get fresh water, and then they'd go back underground to continue their trade wherever they were going, east, west, south, or however.
All right, family. That's going to be the end for this. That's part one. We're going to break this up into 2 parts because it's an hour long. I don't want to keep y'all up too late. It's already pretty late in the evening. So we're going to do part 2 tomorrow and finish up with Dr. Kaba. And hopefully the AI lady, stays quiet. So with that, I appreciate the participation in the chat. Everybody who listened in, checked in. If y'all got any questions, definitely hit us up. We're going to continue to bring you guys as much information that's going to be valuable to you as possible. And until then, peace and love, y'all.